have lost each other in the spillover room. I hope everyone has joined back in. Sorry about the tech issues of 2020 that we are invariably facing this year. But Akash, we lost you somewhere in between, I think. Please, could you continue from where you left off? And then we can ask. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying that the purpose right now is to document voices from particularly vulnerable tribal groups, which I believe have much richer knowledge of biodiversity, literature, and many other things. So, for example, we are trying to get in touch with people from Chenchu tribe, people from Baiga tribe, people from Madia community, who are small in numbers but who have very rich knowledge and history. And not so much for ecology, but our purpose has been to document histories, because this is where we feel that the younger generation has missed out in their formal education. And so we are trying to document some of these histories through through vernacular languages. We are translating them from Telugu to English. We are translating them from Hindi to English, and we are trying to get many other languages and regions to cover other regions. One of the lacunas that we have had is that still our Adivasi discourse is very much focused on either Chota Nagpur or Central India, and there is not much diversity in terms of when you look at the southern India, Nilgiris, or in Kerala, or in Karnataka, or in the entire western India. Those areas are still unknown to most people. People don't know about their histories. So one of our goals right now is to diversify this our knowledge pool in terms of geography. Yeah.
Yuvan, would you like to speak a bit more about your documentation work?
Yeah. I'm slightly hesitant because I don't identify as indigenous, but I work with communities who are native and so on. But I want to speak about maybe two kinds of documentation, which works locally and it works ground up. For instance, the conventional practice of science is a top-down, done somewhere, imposed elsewhere kind of a model. And something which is emerging powerfully across the world and in different places in India is a kind of a ground-up, bottom-up science. We call it citizen science. And one good example of that would be right now, there's a road being built in Mumbai, the coastal road, and parts of it are going on and parts of it are under stay by court, because 8 different hard corals there were documented by people who had gone there, common people, and they were put up on this portal called iNaturalist, and then it was accepted and so on. So that vision and practice of science has scope to invert what science can mean, and its ethicality and its cultural significance. If science is practiced as a community activity, I hope what I'm trying to say is clear. That is one thing. The other thing, kind of documentation I've been doing, especially with fisherfolk, with people from the Lepcha community in Sikkim, Mishmi, and so on, is that this reciprocality between language and place. And there's a very interesting paper which came out in 2012 in the proceedings of National Academy of Sciences. It said a very simple thing, and I don't think till then no eminent paper said that linguistic diversity and biodiversity co-occur. Places in the world which are most linguistically diverse are also biodiverse. One goes, the other has a way of following. and they share a certain complex, not easily tanglable reciprocality to it, and that kind of for instance, when Archana was talking about surnames and that giving an ecological identity, that kind of a documentation is rare, or at least in common platforms in India. Now, for instance, a very notable example of this outside India is in Hawaii, how the colonial times, the Hawaiian language was driven out of schools and English was imposed. And strangely, the green sea turtle went near extinct. And when there was a kind of a revolution and the local language was brought back into schools and into common tongue, in the totemization, the turtle's cultural place and in its folklore, what it stood for, actually drove conservation practices and brought back the green sea turtle on those beaches. That's a very powerful story, and that's something. I'm looking for similar stories in India, and they're surely to exist. For instance, if you look at the spirituality of the Idu Mishmi, nothing is inanimate in their land. There's a spirit for the landslide. There's a spirit for the mountain, the forest, the large tree, the house fire. There is, to even imagine what that might be like, to see the world in those eyes. Or for instance, in the folklore of the Lepcha tribe, there is nothing abstract in their spirituality. The belief is that the first man was made out of pure snow on the Kanchenjunga mountain. And when people die, they travel back on the Teesta River and reach the Kanchenjunga again. And the sacred and the physical and everything is right there and tangible and walkable. And so yeah, so those are two kinds of documentation.
Archana, I believe you are doing documentation work, and you speak about it a lot. Can you also tell us a bit more about the process?
Yeah, so yeah, Ananya and everyone who has joined here. One thing about the process which I personally am looking up to is that, I strongly feel that along with documenting the culture and tradition and traditional knowledge of the indigenous communities, it is also important how we drive this process of documentation to a higher level, because I strongly feel that the discourse will not change until it is reaching to the policy maker or decision makers. And in order to reach to the policy maker and decision makers, I feel documentation also needs to be in line of action. Like, for example, what I personally am looking up to and what process I am adopting is two. One method is that, there has been UNDRIP talks about free, prior and informed consent of the indigenous people prior to any developmental project or in terms of policy making. So I am now will be telling you my field experience, which I experienced when I had gone in field in Mayurbhanj district. So when I went to Mayurbhanj district, when I interacted with the tribal leader, the tribal leader said that there are community members, and there are community members who have been resisting afforestation drive. So I said, what is the problem with afforestation drive? So the tribal leader said the plants which they have brought for afforestation is mango and jackfruit. I said, what is the problem in mango and jackfruit? It is good fruit trees, right? It should not be any problem if they bring it for plantation. Then he said that if the forest department people plant mango and jackfruit tree in the periphery of the area of our village, then the wild animals will come in order to eat those mango and jackfruit, and will destroy our paddy crops and agriculture crops. And that instances was something which made me reflect, is that even I being from the tribal communities, but I am unaware of the local dynamics of that region, and wherein the concept of UNDRIP is very relevant in this area, that the free, prior and informed consent of the people is very important in terms of any policies. So like if we see the afforestation policies is kind of pushing forward for restoration purposes. There are other complications and challenges in terms of afforestation policies, like how plants like which is not sustainable for the local areas are being pushed forward, for plantation. Along with that, it also restricts the ecological and food diversity of the entire area. But this entire experience which I shared is that the local leader then said that we don't want mango tree and jackfruit tree. We need sal tree and siali tree, because those are the trees which will give us livelihood, and it is also good for the entire area. So one of my documentation is that, because I have already read literatures and laws and policies, what the laws and policies are saying. And then when I'm going to the field, I'm getting narratives, or I'm taking field experiences, interacting with the people, putting those experience in the already framework of policies and laws, and giving those examples, stating that how implementation of UNDRIP is important in a local level. So this is one kind of documentation wherein I have been engaged, taking in order to create more and more advocacy of the enabling laws. Documentation and research is being done to push it forward. This is one way how I am proceeding in terms of documentation. Second way in terms of documentation is like how I see the experience which I shared about Nayagarh district, the community-led forest protection committees and their relationship with nature. So when I'm going to the field, I'm also looking into this traditional knowledge and practices which the indigenous communities have, and I'm trying to document it to show that there are innumerous evidences of this traditional knowledge and practices. But at the same time, I'm also identifying the youth with whom we can interact, because it is, even I being from the tribal communities, I cannot represent the entire locality. And that is why it is very important that the youth from that particular tribe or that particular region is also empowered. So that is how I am ensuring that when we are documenting the traditional knowledge and practices, the community youth are being part of that, so that it is collectively done with them, is the second thing. So in both the way of documentation is, one, you pre-think that you want advocacy or stories because you want this enabling policies to be implemented. Second is, you are just going to understand what things have been, and then you are documenting those kind of stories. And what I would like to say is that one thing which is very important and what can be done is, I see it from two perspectives. I think research, academics is also very important along with the other way of formal documentation, because I feel, this is something which has affected me a lot and which concerns me a lot. Like, I had come across a statement like, there is no academician or top researcher in the tribal communities. Even if you want to count the researchers and academician, you can count them in fingers. And that is which is very something which made me, realize that we need indigenous researchers, indigenous academician, because that is something where the decision of policy making is flowing. So currently, I'm also emphasizing on that line, that how we can emphasize on that. apart from the local communities, I'm encouraging more and more youth to document in their own way and on their languages. Like for example, in the Kond, in the Dongaria Kond tribes, so they have a festival of wherein they are doing ragi and millets festival. It is because of that festival only that wherein they collect all the varieties of ragis and they are making there's a puja and there is celebration there. So because of that celebration of the festival, the entire varieties of ragi is protected. If that culture gets eroded, if that festival gets eroded, all the ragi or the different varieties of food will not be there. So I think these kind of documentation is also very important of the traditional knowledge and practice.
Thank you so much, Archana, and thank you to all three for talking about such diverse ways of documentation that you're following, and we hope that we'll be able to read more about this and it grows. So just a question to probably wrap up today's panel. This is a question from the Indigenous Studies discussion group at Cambridge. And the question is, what do the panelists think should be things that non-Indigenous researchers must keep in mind when working with Indigenous communities, past or present, with knowledge and with the communities themselves? So, Akash, do you want to go first with that?
Yeah, that is a complicated question, I feel, because there are so many things that are at play here. Where do I begin? In the sense, non-Indigenous communities so far have been documenting Indigenous communities. If you pick any edited volume in library, which is about tribal movement or tribal knowledge, or most of the edited volumes will probably have one tribal scholar and the rest will be non-tribals. So when this question is often raised, I feel a bit hesitant to answer how non-tribals can engage when there is already years and decades of knowledge being produced by non-tribals, right? And at the same time, the gaze, I think here what we need to understand is the gaze is important. So, for example, often what happens is that when non-Indigenous scholars, they work with Indigenous communities, there is a hijacking of voices, consciously, unconsciously, and the gaze always is towards the victim side of the people. I have seen this in most non-Indigenous scholars, that they do not see any empowering element in the everyday lives of people. And I think that, you know, when non-Indigenous scholars are engaging with Indigenous communities, there are so many ethical concerns, first of all, because I often get, like, since we started Adivasi Resurgence, I get so many emails from non-Indigenous people writing to me to help them do research, which seems ridiculous, because they have no understanding of my tribe and they want to venture into a PhD in my tribe. Like, how can you? And they wouldn't even know that my tribe is called Koitur, not Gond. And I mean, what I'm trying to say, with zero or very minimum understanding of a community or a region, the non-tribal scholar venture into the field. And I think that's not the case with everyone. Obviously, there are some scholars who, who can be considered that they have had a very empathetic journey. They have had a very humble journey with how they see themselves as merely a collaborator, as a part of a collective project. And this is something that we also are trying to, see in future, that even when we are working, most of our, even as Adivasis, our knowledge production is a collective knowledge production. And I think that acknowledgement has to be there. But here, when there is a political economy of, on tribal literature, especially in academics, I feel it becomes complicated for us to say that, or say that, there should be more non-Indigenous people working with Indigenous communities. I think one way they can engage with is looking at shifting the gaze to the oppressor. Who is the oppressor in my area? Like, I can't say, I know some work where, the gaze has been towards a particular company or a particular, say, a dominant community which has been exploiting these indigenous people. And I think the constant obsession with the victimhood of Adivasi communities is something that is common in almost all, most of the non-indigenous scholarships. And again, to say, I mean, this is not hidden. I mean, you can literally pick any edited volume, academic volume, and I'm surprised that it is still not being questioned that, how 99% of those scholars are non-tribals. But if the same thing happens in the West, I don't think it would be accepted so easily. But in India, and here I think I would like to bring this dynamics of caste, because I have seen that while scholars who engage with anti-caste discourse, who write about Dalit issues or caste issues, they have a lot more reflexivity in terms of which community they belong to. But when I have seen when the upper caste people, they work with tribal and Adivasi communities, there is almost a complete invisibilization of their location in those works. And it's as if I do not know who this person is. And I think that's a very problematic. It's also, I think it's a methodology that upper caste people, non-tribal people, especially in India case, need to work on their own to figure out how they can approach, indigenous knowledge, or learn or have a collaborative project in a more humane, humble manner, without without appropriating, without disrespecting the community. So yeah, I mean, this is a very larger question. I don't think I can sum it up so easily, and I'm sure Rocky will be able to add valuable points to it.
Yeah, thank you, Akash, for pushing me to say on this line. Nevertheless, here my take is that the question is not about insider versus outsiders, but I think the larger question is what is the agenda of that research? In the sense that every research, the way any scholar has theorized, has got its own context. Not only the context, and also about the agenda and the future. So, for instance, research, like knowledge for emancipation, knowledge for empowerment, it's different from the knowledge productions for one's own care. I think we should welcome whoever scholars who are interested in indigenous studies, who are interested on tribal studies. Here the question, I think, lies fundamentally on the questions of methodology. So if one is trying to produce knowledge for empowerment, and you and I use the same colonial framework or the Brahminical caste perspective in order to unravel the tribal society, there lies fundamental, there is a question. So here I would like to cite the example of this tribal intellectual collective where I'm part of this group in terms of the knowledge production. We are more into the academic, in terms of knowledge production than academic sphere. And also, whatever our books are being written, it is available free of course in our website. And we often recognize that there is a difference between the pre-Khaka and the post-Khaka engagement on tribal studies. We try to problematize the way colonialism is being conceptualized, the framing of modernity, and I say, whose modernity in that case? So post-Khaka framework, where tribal intellectual collective also recognize that there is a waves of colonialism taking place, and there is also an alternate path to modernity. And if we can sort of alter, say for instance, in anthropology, we talk about participants' observation. So what is this? All this about is participants' observation. So can we engage that into, say, like engage observations rather than a participation observation? Then also something like on engage governance, premise on the very basis of the mutual respect, effective safeguard, and also equitable partnership in that very knowledge production. And the end who holds the knowledge production, I think, is important. So towards the end here, I would like to pose it again. So it's not about insider or outsider, but the hardcore, the question is about the methodology and how we premise our research for emancipation, research for empowerment, or also advocate like something called development with justice. So research with justice, I think that's all like position. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Rocky has put it very well. Thank you, Rocky. Yeah.
Thank you. Archana, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so as everyone has said, uh, I strongly feel it's again, for me, what I strongly feel is whenever we are talking about documentation or working with the tribal communities, the first and the foremost thing which is important is understanding the tribal worldview, because that is the prerequisite. Because for example, because I work in forest rights issues, what is customary area for me, for the community members, is not equivalent to what is there in the government records. And that is how it is very important to understand the worldview, because the worldview of the indigenous community is very different than the existing laws and policies and the existing discourse, which again comes from the colonial perspective. So, if we really want to support and understand and work and document for the tribal communities, the first and foremost thing will be to understand the worldview of the indigenous communities. And the second thing, which over the years I have realized, is that the any documentation is very subjective, I feel. Like, for example, if I am documenting a I am documenting an issues which is happening in my area, that is in my village, right? And I understood the issues, I understood the recommendation, and then I wrote it. But that entire issue or the recommendation which I have written will not be 100% correct, or it becomes the truth, because the truth, or the argument will be again different for the upcoming generation of on that areas. Like, for example, the stories of origin, the stories of origin, if we see of the tribal communities of our, or our histories, it is again, if I interact with one tribal leader, and then say that the origin or the history of Khadiya tribe is this, because I interviewed a Khadiya tribal leader, then again I feel that that is not something which is 100% true. Because the thing is, again, it comes down to a communitarian way of documentation. And that is why I feel, rather than one personal interview, that entire documentation needs to be validated from the entire communities, because everyone has their own perspectives, and everyone's perspective in the community matters, whether it is children, whether it is women, or whether it is the village leader. And again, the role of entire communities knowledge is very important, because knowledge in the indigenous community is a communitarian. It's not a kind of quantitative data or qualitative data analysis which we are doing, that we are randomly 1 2 3 we are interacting or taking interview of the people, because it has a serious repercussion once we do documentation without understanding the worldview of the tribal community. So this is what at the end I would like to say, is that we are together in terms of when we talk about climate action. Because if I say in terms of climate action is affecting everyone along with the tribal communities. But what is very important is to pass the mic, is to give the let the tribal communities say their own stories. At the same time, what we expect is a solidarity, respect, and help in amplifying our own voices.
I would just like to add one point, Ananya.
Yes, Akash.
Yeah, I was saying that I think there is also, because of the politics of citation, which we already know, even though there is a lot of conversation about decolonizing. But I have seen, like, in my community, there is not a single book that has been written in English, first of all. Most of the books that have been written, and the first book was written in 1920s, and since then, in 1970s, 80s, there has been a huge literary revitalization with the Gondwana Darshan magazine, which is almost 35 years old. It is one of the oldest magazines. There is scholars like Dr. Motiraman Kangali, who has written over 15 books. But when you look at any academic work, any peer-reviewed journal work about my community, you can't even find Kangali's name. So why there is this deliberate, I feel, exclusion of certain sources which are not considered academic enough. So this is where the problem is, that when we are saying that we should decolonize our spaces, then at the same time, there is a parameter of what is academic and what is non-academic. And I have seen that many of these writers who are writing in vernacular languages are not taken seriously. And I think as many non-indigenous scholars, I think they need to engage more with the voices which are already there, because there is this assumption that Adivasis have not written. But if you just, look back last 50, 60 years, there is huge amount of literature produced in vernacular languages, which doesn't get the same attention as, the university institute-based academic work. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Akash. And I think in relation to the poem that you shared of Salu Majhi as well, I'd just like to add that it's one of the most essential poems to come out of India in the 21st century, and yet so many people are unaware of it. And Salu Majhi and Dombu Proska, both from Odisha, and as well as so many other oral poets, some of whom we have lost recently. And I really wish that we can document more of these songs, and that work can be done, or their voices can actually be, as Archana so rightly pointed out, that we need to pass the mic onto indigenous writers, indigenous poets, and scholars, and have them take up the platform, and so that we engage more with their voices directly, rather than only through non-indigenous writings on indigenous work being written. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of you, and to our panelists mainly, for being so generous with your time and with your knowledge. I understand that it must be very late in India right now, but thank you so much for sticking with us, and bearing with the tech issues from my end mostly, and for bringing in diverse ideas and very important ideas about colonialism, caste, Brahminism, Adivasi agency and voice, Adivasi intellectual property, community histories, and tribal worldviews, which are essential and, as you say, are prerequisites if we are to frame and talk about the climate crisis, climate action, and ways of sustaining practices in the future. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. Please do follow the social handles of all our speakers here. I follow them myself, and it's extremely valuable knowledge. And please follow the social handles of Indigenous Studies discussion group as well. And we will be announcing more panels soon. We would always like to center Indigenous voices. Thank you so much for joining us today, and hope you all enjoyed the panel as much as we did. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.